Hello, hello, hello. How are you all doing? You okay? You will probably notice that I am not Phil. I know. Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you. And although he's been known to have multiple personalities, we couldn't let him introduce himself for the last talk of the day. So yes, you've got me for the final leg of the day. I hope you all had a good break. In case you're playing along at home, Fiona made her train with 20 seconds to spare. So I think that's something even Leonie's agent couldn't have done. So I think it's really an impressive effort for her there. But yeah, so allow me to introduce myself. If you don't know me, I'm Josh Nesbitt. I've been the organizer of this event for 10 years. Thank you. Yes, thank you. And also the Hay events for the last 14 years. So so this has been quite a long affair for us really to get stuck into these conferences, and it's been a very enjoyable thing for us to do. So we need to talk about the last biscuit of the day, most importantly. And, the digestif, we're calling it, is the most important biscuit for us to focus on as Phil takes the stage. I like the idea of going with the chocolate one because it adds more stability to the biscuit, and you can make of that what you will with Phil's talk. But yes, we did discuss a brandy or a port to go along with it, but that might make Phil a little bit sloppy on stage with his talk, so we decided against it. His rider is very firmly biscuit-based, and he runs a tight ship. So yes, I do feel it's a bit like cheating though, Phil, because you got to pick everyone else's biscuits, but you picked your own, which is probably not ideal. So if anyone wants to recommend a different biscuit that Phil might suit, that might be a good option. So any ideas apart from the digestive? Any other? Jaffa cake. Well, we've had this before. Jaffa cake. Is it a cake or is it a biscuit? That's the very difficult. Well, we'll move on from the biscuit-related chat. So yes, we landed on the digestif. But yes, we spoke to Phil, about sort of speaking at the event at previous points in history, and we did say, you can speak if you want, but it might be the end of the conference, and I think that's exactly what's happened here. But there was only one person who could possibly close out this conference, and it is absolutely Phil. Before Phil knew that this was going to be the last one, I was going to ask him to speak anyway, and he came forward with an idea that he had before he knew it was going to be the last one, and it fits perfectly for this slot. So I'm really excited to see Phil take the stage. Yes. So in speaker mode, I guess, instead of MC mode, I really want you to give Phil the warmest possible welcome to the stage. He does it for everyone else, and I want you to give him the biggest round of applause. Phil Hawksworth, please.
Hey, give me a hug. Well, oh dear, I'm so nervous. I'm so nervous now. Mostly because that kind of introduction and the kind of reflection about this conference makes it feel like I'm about to give a wedding speech, and so I get wobbly with the voice. On my wedding day, when I did give a speech, I stuffed myself immediately by kind of getting too sentimental at the beginning and cracked immediately, which I'll try not to do now. But what I did then is, if that ever happened, I just go and cheers. Who knows? It might happen, but we've got a way to go yet. Surely. I'm just going to restart my timer first of all. There we go. So I kind of thought we'd talk about learning lessons, and so writing titles for talks is kind of tricky. Learning along the way how incredibly kind of twee and kind of how skippy and happy that sounds. I thought about learning by doing, and these guys, look how dynamic they are. They're doing stuff. I'm sure they're learning lessons. One of the titles I considered was "What Would the Fonz Do?", which makes no sense until slides 100 and something. So I discarded that. But just enough to say that I wanted to talk a little bit about learning, about values, and about growth. We'll come to those along the way, and I think we're always learning in our work, and we're learning through our lives and what have you, and we come to this event to learn amongst other things. And I've been learning about being on stage at conferences for a long time, I guess now. The first talk I ever did was in 2011, which was at Remy's conference. It was at FF Conf in Brighton, and And I've learned lessons since then. I've learned that code of conducts exist. I've learned that choosing titles is hard and also tricky for lots of reasons. This wasn't the title for my talk, by the way. The title for my talk, these are my slides from then, was Excessive Enhancement, which I think was a suggestion from Jake. I think Jake suggested that title. Yes, thank you, Jake. I think you were deliberately stitching me up so that you could then say in the pub the night before, it sounds like something else, and lay me a little tripwire. In that talk, I was kind of talking about the dangers of some of the practices that are getting fashionable on the web, and it doesn't seem like many things changed in some ways, I guess. But I was a bit of finger waggy, and I thought I was a genius. I thought I've got something that no one's ever thought of before, and I'll put this quote up. Maybe I just haven't been to enough conferences because it's everywhere, and I'm certainly not the person who discovered it. I think I was the first person to say if we don't do things right, there are terrible consequences, and I was suggesting that this is the kind of thing that can happen. Sounds very worthy and self-important, but I really believe that what we do matters. We might not be doctors or human rights lawyers or school teachers, but we make things for an audience. Some things are for play, some things are for a very, very serious purpose. And we often share our opinions on how things should be made and how things should be done. And so I think what we do, it does matter. And so I kind of want to talk a bit as well about responsibility before we get to learning and values and growth. And goodness me, what a way to get you at the end of the day to have a slide. I'm not getting emotional, I'm just thirsty. Cheers. It was a test. You may be needed later. But responsibility, might not sound terribly exciting. But something I think we kind of share here is this approach to wanting to build the web with responsibility, and really care for something that we collectively kind of govern and contribute and shape and influence. And I think that's really important, and I care about that a great deal. That's why events like this are so important. But of course, there's real value in play and experiment and kind of, just joy. And, there's so much value in experimentation and, messing about. And I think I just kind of want to touch a little bit on the value of play. And I can't really do that justice at all after the talks that we've seen throughout the day. There have been so many that do that so brilliantly. But, I think it's a really important thing, Play is an important part of learning across the animal kingdom of which we are part. But, not all of our play looks like this. Some of it looks like this. And my goodness, the experimentation and the kind of learnings that come from curiosity and something like Angela's talk is wild to me. And also, seeing examples of what is possible with the tools when Bram was showing these things, it's really exciting. I think we all want to go and play and experiment, and I love that. I also going to want to consider that, we need to accept that we don't know everything. We've got lots of different strengths and weaknesses and amounts of expertise in different domains in this room. But we're sometimes we become domain experts in expanding fields, which is kind of frustrating because you start to learn about a thing and you level up and you think, hooray, I know everything, and this happens because there's more to learn, and so you keep leveling up and then this happens, and could be frustrating, but I think that's one of the things that maybe a lot of us share, a kind of a delight in that. It kind of keeps it interesting. There's also always something more to learn, always something more to do. But I think we need to accept that we don't always necessarily know everything. And I mention that because there's this idea of faking it till you make it, which can be really liberating and really empowering, but also it kind of gets on my nerves sometimes. It can be a bit dangerous because sometimes we feel like, we've seen people who sometimes behave like they're a domain expert and they blag it. And that can be a bit of a dangerous thing. I prefer to think of faking it till you make it as getting comfortable being out of your comfort zone. We heard Fiona kind of talk about the comfort zone earlier on. And I like the idea of kind of being ready to try and expand our comfort zone, again, as Fiona mentioned. And so I think faking it till you're making it should kind of put us in a position to think about that. So today I kind of want to talk about play a little bit and about things that we learn through play and things that we learn through our work. And I thought I'd do it in a number of ways, in a number of areas. I kind of wanted to talk about learning and discovery through creative exploration, through the value of demonstrating a principle by something playful and silly and and creative, and in the ways that we can overcome an obstacle through getting creative and kind of scratching our heads. And I thought, so really, I'd tell you some stories from things that I've been involved in the past and maybe some of the things I've learned. So that's the plan. Is that okay? Okay, thank you. So we'll start with overcoming an obstacle. And this is a project that I worked on back in 2013, I think it was, for Beats by Dre. There was a campaign called Show Your Color. I was working at a big branding agency at the time. And Beats were launching some new headphones, which I'll talk about in a second. But the key was that they wanted to have a big social campaign, have lots of user-generated content. You know, it was prime that time where every advert had to have a member of the public in it, like real people. So there's lots of user-generated content. So as a result, you bet your ass it had a hashtag. And you know, this is a campaign that was launched online. There was a web application that we made. It was a web-based campaign initially, but we also took it to New York for a physical installation. And this is all about launching a product which, you know, this headphone had a particular new innovation, which was different colored plastic. So I don't know if you remember, amazing times, weren't they? Can you remember the first time? So the idea was that we'd be launching this big brand of different colored headphones in Times Square in New York. The concept being that people could come and interact with a physical version of the web application. And the web application was really just a way of making a poster with you holding some sort of product. So down in the corner over there, you can see a little white shack that we built in Times Square, and then people would end up with their photos plastered all over these screens all over Times Square. This is like the bird's eye view of the building that we erected there, and people gathering, and you know, they'd come in and they'd take a photo and then kind of customize this little poster, put the name, the word that they wanted on there, something playful, have a color on there that they chose. They would be showing their color, very clever, layers in this. And then, you know, there'd be various kind of screens in there and kind of slideshow around outside, and they'd see the things that were being created, and then they'd get kind of posted up to the screens around Times Square over the course of, it was half a day. It was like lunchtime to, I think it was like 10 p.m. And I won't show the entire sizzle reel here for this, which has got lots of kind of beautiful people looking amazed at their picture on the wall. But I do want to skip to this part of the sizzle reel, which I really love, and I didn't notice until I looked back at it recently, which is this guy who'd, you know, been through and had a lovely time. He's part of the sizzle reel, and fair play to him. He had a lovely time, but my goodness, I don't think that's the perfect. I mean, it looks like a mugshot. It's through no fault of his own. There we are. It's even worse when you realise that billboard is over the CNN billboard, which says on here, ex-Serb leader says, foes plotted massacre, with relax. So I can't believe none of us spotted that. But anyway, that's far from the point. You know, the team from London, we travelled across to the London offices there, and we set up all of this equipment that we're going to be in this physical installation, and we worked with the teams through the night to kind of get these things out into Times Square and built and kind of constructed this thing. And then within that, there were these kind of photo booths that would drive the screens around the town, and the square, and also kind of push things to the web. And so, you know, as technical director on that at the time, my job was to figure out how we would do that. And it was an interesting challenge, you know. So this is the web app that we had. You know, this is 2013. So we had, can you just about read that? I think so. So there was a Django application that we had an API that we kind of exposed that talked to a browser. So we had a browser-based web app. It was a very JavaScripty web app, if I'm very honest, that would let people kind of upload their photos and make their poster, and those would go into the API. At the time, you had to have a Facebook app. Apparently, a Facebook app still a thing? I don't know. I'm not sure. But anyway, that spoke to the same API to create this bit of content. All that was stored in a Postgres database, and this was on Heroku, and it kind of stored things in S3. And you know, that all kind of worked nicely. And when we went to make the physical version of this, we were very nervous about network connectivity because the screens are expensive. They're billed by the less than the minute. I think it's by the 10 seconds, and it's not cheap to do. So we kind of replicated this. So we had the same sort of setup. That was in a local VM in a machine that was kind of in that building, and that was driving these kiosk applications, which are on these touchscreen PCs that were talking to digital SLR, and they were driving the slideshows from the API, and then there was like local printing through a cup server. It was a whole thing, and then that would contribute the content back into the main API and kind of store those and serve those across the web as well. But then was the interesting bit, and this is the bit that took some experimentation. Next, that the content from that API would drive those big screens, and so that had to drive something. We weren't quite sure what that something was going to be that drives the giant screens around Times Square. So we hoped that, so whatever it is, it'll be some PC, some machine locally to those big screens that has, we'll be able to run some sort of web application there and kind of get the content. And what there was on there was some old Flash player that could not be upgraded. Could not be touched in any way. You could give them a Flash application. There was lots of vetting, and that was it. So that was a challenge, especially since we could not talk to HTTP through that either. We couldn't make any kind of fetch requests to anything. So a challenge. So what would we do? How were we going to get this content from the system up into the big screens? We came up with a novel technology. Anyone, any thoughts? USB. Oh, that would have been amazing. Just running up and down the stairs. I would have had thighs like this by the end of that. We went for email. So it turns out that we couldn't, make a fetch request, but we could get email there. And so we came up with this system where we would be outputting emails where the subject was the hex code, the color people had chosen. The body would be the display word that they'd chosen to show their color. And then the attachment was the image. And then that Flash application would receive those and drive these massive, scary screens in Times Square. I don't remember what the email address was for that. It's one that I was worried about. The thought about people just being able to put whatever they wanted on there didn't fill me with joy. But it kind of, we got stuff onto these screens, and it worked. And it did feel like it was a lot of jeopardy. Not this much jeopardy, but still jeopardy nonetheless. And, sometimes you just got to get a bit creative, and it felt clunky and it felt scary, and it was not the desired design that we started out with, but it was kind of rock solid. It worked flawlessly for the duration of that campaign physically there, and the campaign lived on the web for after that. It turns out email's quite a good way of delivering things, but not our first choice, but experimentation got us there. Okay, I want to move on to a different prospect. Correct. And that's like demonstrating a principle. Sometimes we make silly things just to prove a point and demonstrate a principle, kind of prove a concept, if you like. In my past life, in 2017 and kind of prior to that, I had these conversations regularly with clients, particularly at big enterprise customers. Actually, this wasn't a very regular conversation. This was a rarity, like the delight of getting the production deployments down to 5 days with this giant deployment team. It was a common thing to really struggle. It's hard to think of that for some of us. Maybe some of us are still living with infrastructure that it really is very difficult to deploy, but the idea of friction-free deployments is kind of the norm now. But back then I was trying to prove that point to people a lot, and I always said that deploys should be and can be close to friction-free. So apologies, I've kind of used this example and talked about this before because it happened a long time ago, but the goal I had was to illustrate that deployments could be friction-free, and I happened upon an opportunity to do that when the wonderful Zach Leatherman, for reasons of his own, tweeted one day, it's a free side project idea, an HTML-only static site-generated clock that deploys a new version to Netlify every minute. I was working at Netlify at the time. I thought, yep, that proves the point that I'm trying to make. So I know lots of people have seen this before, but this is something that it was discussed. It got Chris Coyer's attention, and he's like, it'd be a clever marketing idea for Netlify. And I saw this, and I felt that was a good thing that I could maybe build to illustrate this idea. It's kind of playful. But I thought about it some more, and I did say, only an idiot would make what you're suggesting. Here it is. So this is gone now for reasons I'll explain. But I made this thing. I've talked about it before, and it's a website with the time on it. And that time was the time that website was built, on the server. And, depending on where you access that in the world, you would get a different time because we'd generate a time for every time zone, formatted correctly. And that also helped us demonstrate that we would automatically route things on the CDN for, to the right place, and we could do localization and what have you. I lied a little bit. We didn't do every time zone. I did a few time zones, and then people could submit pull requests if they wanted to add their time zone to the site. But this was something that was triggered by something called WebTask, which was basically cron that would fire off events, and that would talk to a webhook. Nice and easy, and it worked really well. It worked really well as a talking point, as an illustration to make the point that deployments are friction-free. Massively irresponsible. It did hundreds of thousands of deployments, which is why I eventually retired it, thinking, can I live with this as an electricity bill? It feels unnecessary. So I did turn that off eventually, and also, cron ended up being something that was very readily available and understood in lots of the kind of hosting platforms that are popular now. We had things like edge functions that would solve some of the problems that we might have. So I had to think then, after I retired that, well, what would I do instead to illustrate this idea that deploying a site is basically friction-free and you can do it in just a snap? And thinking about, can I demonstrate triggers and hooks and automation and what have you? I thought about it. And so then I wondered, what would Fonzie do to do that? And I should probably just check in here. People familiar with Fonzie? Yeah. Yes, some people are definitely, confidently familiar. Not everyone necessarily is. And I should be very clear, this is not Fonzie. This is not who I'm talking about. Arthur Fonzarelli. Fonzarelli? Really? Should we talk about this for a bit longer as the clock winds down? No. Arthur Fonzarelli, character in Happy Days. He had something called the Fonzie touch. I didn't make this up. This is according to Wikipedia. The Fonzie touch was this. This is the Fonz. This is him. Oh, turning on a jukebox. A lot of it was turning things on with a bit of a bump. The ladies loved it. Apparently, he could do all sorts. It wasn't just jukebox. It was like lights he could turn off, and if necessary, he could turn them back on again. I think there was probably a light switch above there, so it feels a bit redundant to me. It was largely jukebox based, if I'm honest, but it seemed very impressive. So I thought it would be nice to be able to deploy a website with the Fonzie touch. So I thought I'll do some experimenting then, and so I've never done anything with like hardware before, so I got myself a Raspberry Pi Pico, and I didn't even realise there was audio on here. You probably hear me thumping and grunting and all sorts, but yeah. So I kind of got myself a little motion sensor and kind of learnt a few things and wired it up and made myself a site with a deploy hook that I would kind of copy and put into something that would get triggered. Just checking. And I'd start doing a little bit of Python and script this up, and it was very, very sensitive. So you had to be very careful. And then if you give it a thump, nothing. Thump, nothing. Tabbity tap, nothing. Apparently that worked. Who knew? So then that would hopefully deploying building, and then Now, very happy about that. Now, was this useful? I don't know, but I learned some things along the way, and it helped me illustrate a point. I learned a bit about Raspberry Pi Picos and MicroPython and debouncing signal inputs. I could probably do a bit more work on that. Triggering actions with webhooks, I was kind of illustrating that and discovering that the Fonzie touch is harder than it looks. So, as a principle, I had a goal of deploying, showing deploys could be friction-free. I got somewhere with that. It's kind of fun. Let me move along to kind of learning and discovery, and I might go through this one quite quickly because I think again people have probably seen this before, but I wanted to kind of prove out like mixed rendering models for things, particularly as I'm a big fan of rendering as much statically as possible and kind of caching as much as I can, and then adding other rendering models afterwards to kind of augment that, and so I set myself a little project of taking all of my social posts off Twitter for reasons, and self-hosting them. And that meant thousands of posts and what have you. So I had set myself some requirements, my goals for this. I wanted a URL for every one of the 24,000 tweets that I had. I wanted index pages listing those so I could find them and see their URL. I wanted the ability to search those tweets. I wanted to retain a reasonable build time. I didn't want to make my build last forever. I wanted to avoid client-side rendering if possible. And I wanted a logical model that fits in my brain. I wanted to be able to articulate this and talk about it. And so, I made this thing, and it was based on the fact that the data was in JSON. It was available. So I stashed the JSON after exporting it. And this is a static website that would run a build and output a bunch of assets that were deployed on the web. And those would be for the index pages and the content page of my blog as well. So the index page is listing all of the tweets, and then the user would come along and they'd be able to see those. And I'm going to skip through this video of me showing you what a web page with links looks like on it. But maybe if I just fast forward a tiny bit, I could page through these, and there were about 955 pages that this generated as the index pages. And luckily it was kind of paginated, and there were URLs for it. Great. How did the build do? Well, the build continued to take about 2 seconds. I was using 11T to generate this. Whole deployment took close to 30, I think, but the build itself took about 2 seconds. Super. So what's the next part of that? Well, the next part is to create a URL for every one of those social posts. I didn't want to do that at build time because, I don't know, not a lot of people are going and having a look at those. Occasionally someone will go and look at one of those pages. And so I used something called on-demand builders, which is effectively a way of running a serverless function that would render something and pop that in the cache with the rest of everything else. So I'd make an on-demand builder. A user would make a request for the URL of one of those posts. That would get routed to this function that would go and get the same data that the whole site was built from, getting the right bit of content, push it into the cache of assets, and then I get a post page for each of these tweets. And this worked quite nicely as well, So now I could click on the permalink for these things, and I'd have a tweet that says, what does that say? It's not content gold, but it was the principle, and it had a URL, and jobs are good. So then, what about search? So I wanted to make sure that I could search all of those things. So then I added, some kind of edge-side rendering, if you like, so an edge function in Netlify speak and in many speak now, I guess. And what this would do is, if I performed a search, it would hit this serverless function that acted a bit differently to the other ones. It would go off and search, do a string match, dumb as you like, a string match against that big blob of JSON, come back with a page that would render, that listed those search results, and return that to the user. And that seemed to work really nicely as well. I wasn't sure how performant it would be, which is why I did that on my own website first to kind of play and experiment. Really delighted that people have been talking about, the benefits of having your personal website at this conference. It keeps on cropping up. So, if I search for render, I'd get all of these pages that then I could go and view and see something about web rendering or not, or what here. My wife keeps sending me random pictures of my cat rendered as a cuddly toy, and I'm here for it. Yeah, this is the kind of thing that I would get from her. This cat. Who says AI isn't here to stay? This is very, very faithful. What is that? If you're more of a dog person than a cat person, she did next door's dog as well. So anyway, the point was kind of proved. I illustrated this thing, and it kind of worked quite nicely, and I could use this as an example from time to time. But we're not here to have fun. This is serious business, as I said earlier on. And for me, like APIs and webhooks and events, I get so much. They're so much fun. I think there's so many possibilities, and there are these building blocks you can do all sorts with. But of course, they can be used for serious things as well. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about a slightly more serious thing that I worked on, applying some of these learnings. And this is a side project that kind of just came out of nowhere for me. And I built on some of the lessons I'd learned experimenting, and I learned a few more things along the way. Now, I'm really proud of this because these two people here. My sister is on the left. She lives in California, and this is her and Wei, who they co-founded an organization to help in the Santa Clara County in San Francisco called the United Effort Organization. And this started, just a bit of context for this started as recognizing there's loads of food insecurity in the area. And it started like going around the supermarkets, getting all of the excess food and taking them to be turned into resources at a food bank. And then it kind of grew to kind of providing meals and showers for the homeless, and then trying to provide all kinds of mentoring and resources as a path towards self-sufficiency. One of the real challenges they had was that the resources for this kind of thing are just really scattered. Lots of organizations try and do that, but the resources to try and help you get back into housing is really difficult. So they wanted to find a good way to do the gathering of these resources, and they'd made themselves a website. You know, a friend of theirs had volunteered to help build a website. They were a very old school Java developer, no shade there, but the front end was designed by a very old school Java developer. Had a particular aesthetic. It couldn't really be updated in any meaningful way. You had to have access to the database directly as the developer, and there was a lot that was a challenge about it. There's no content management. You know, it couldn't be crawled or searched. There was not bookmarkable. It was not really quite fit for purpose. So they had a goal to make this usable and to make it current. You know, the data on there had to be up to date. It's hard to source, as I mentioned. And then the challenging one is to keep it current after that. So, you know, I work with them to kind of help them just redesign this site to something that was very basic, very boring. I'm a big fan of boring when it comes to just getting a point across and, you know, being valuable. We built this kind of responsive design site with semantic HTML, typography heavily influenced by GovUK and like the lessons that I've learned from listening to people there. We decoupled the data, so that lived in Airtable. We used 11T with mixed rendering models, just like I'd learned by playing with this other thing to help us build one aspect of this. And it was using GitHub and Netlify and what have you. And this is all fine, but my sister came to me and said, well, we want to provide a searchable housing database. That's a really broad request, right? What does that mean? It could mean so many things. And so I thought about it for a little while. I wanted to propose a few things, but critically, I had to admit, you know, what I didn't know. And that's kind of mentioned, you know, faking it till you make it. And this is a limit there. You know, I had to admit what I didn't know, because I could bring all kinds of domain user expertise about, you know, some of these things. I didn't know anything about this stuff, about, you know, the client needs, you know, how people would consume it, what devices and capabilities the people needing this would have, what the processes were to get back into housing and all of those kind of things. So they had domain expertise there and I had that there, and we just had to talk a lot about it. And the key there was really, when I wasn't sure what I should assume, was I had to ask and I had to listen and I had to replay what I thought was the right solution for that. And so this is the most exciting slide you'll have seen all day. Brace yourself. I was really proud of this. You know, I distilled down for them like a simple document that very, very concisely articulated the functional requirements and the non-functional requirements and the things that the different users could use, could get from this, and the progress we'd made and what the next steps were, because they weren't used to these kind of projects at all. And I was used to it, but you know, you sometimes just want to dive in and just make stuff. So making this as a resource and these artifacts to direct the development, was an unusual area of learning for me in this context. So I thought that was a really important thing. And the way that it was all built, I'll show you some more lines and boxes because I love lines and boxes, is it was a static site that looks very similar to the thing I made for my social posts earlier on. And then we used some edge functions to filter out the properties and create like a findable property database. The data was abstracted out to Airtable, and this was the big key. Kind of playing with this and exploring this for some pet projects before meant that I could recommend it to them. And that abstraction was really key. And you know, again, this isn't an exciting UI unless you were using the old UI. And then you found that, you know, you can start looking at, you know, where the properties are in the area. You can kind of drill into this. You can filter these down. Again, we've seen UI like this before. I'm not showing you something that's incredible, but it was incredible to them that they could do this so rapidly and we could iterate on it so quickly. You know, they had the insight as well that we don't just need to see where they are, these properties, we need to see the bus stops nearby. So we said, okay, we'll add bus stops to it, because of course that's critical for that kind of audience. So anyway, I won't go into too much more of what that looked like. You've seen that kind of UI before, but I do want to just say that this challenge of keeping it current was kind of interesting and exciting as well. And I ended up working with a volunteer in their organization who just said, I can help with some computer stuff. I was really nervous when I heard that, by the way. I thought, okay, let's see how that goes. He was amazing. He's now their CTO, but he really embraced this. And we worked a lot on how the data was structured in Airtable. And initially, we were kind of grabbing data from all kinds of places, all different sites in the area that none of them are the same. None of them are formatted appropriately. None of them have good kind of clarity in there. They're not really easy to parse. They're not really consistent. Sometimes things come in emails. Sometimes they're printed notices. All of these sources need to get into this central database. So to start off with, you had volunteers scouring those and then putting them in through a simple UI that we kind of worked on. And then later, like Trevor, who's the guy now who's their CTO, he started building out kind of monitoring of those other sites and resources for change and scrapers to bring those in that still have the ability for people to kind of validate those and monitor them. And all of those things get fed back to the website. And of course, we thought, well, we've got the data, so let's feed it out to whoever wants it as JSON, because the success of this site isn't about bringing people here. We want to just solve the problem. So this data is now available for anyone who wants to consume it, including, kind of interestingly, the sources. These sites that found it very hard to be updated and kind of maintained. We thought, well, if we can expose the data for them as well, maybe the best place for them to update the content in the first place is down in our system in the first place. So we learned a lot there. I kind of was talking about decoupled data and events and triggers and scraping and structuring and build automation and rendering techniques, all this kind of stuff. But the real lessons from this experiment and this kind of side project was really about the value in requirements gathering and interrogating goals and really challenging the goals and having those conversations and really learning about that and expressing that in a meaningful way. And the communication was really key. And this is a really long way of me getting around to this point that this shared understanding was so important. And it's something that I've learned, in all of these kind of examples, even, the ones that I worked with big agencies, like small side projects, the noddy things that I've made for myself, shared understanding maybe doesn't apply to those, but I'd maybe put it as clear goals. I set myself clear goals for that. And I really wanted to articulate that. And that's one of the takeaways that I've got from all of these kind of experiments is understanding what you're doing it for. Now, play is fine and it's valuable, and unstructured play and just doing it for the hell of it, that's fine, and that's a goal in itself. But having these clear goals when you're trying to work with other people is super important. Now I heard the term assumption earlier on, and assumptions are so deadly here. And there's a saying about assumptions, right? They're dangerous, and the saying is, I think if you make assumptions, you can make a right tit out of yourself. I think it's something along those lines. But having things really clearly expressed and a shared understanding is so key. And I think it's really key for something that comes next. I'm nervous about this part of the presentation, so excuse me. I knew you wouldn't let me down. Let's see how we get on after this bit. I think this is really important, like the assumptions and kind of having clear goals. And it's going to be really important for what I don't think I should have called our next frontier, but certainly a next frontier, given that our domain is always increasing in complexity. And one of the big frontiers that's coming for us, I'm sorry to say, it's scary, and it's ethically difficult, and it's environmentally challenging, and it's a hugely overvalued bubble, and it's undeniably here. I'm afraid. And I was very nervous about putting this up after this slide, which I was cheering as much as anybody else, I have to be honest. But yeah, AI is definitely a thing that is going to impact us. And I've been in the position many times where I felt like I've been talking about the right way to do things and like really bucking the trend and trying to push against the prevailing trends, if you like. And I think I've been in danger of doing that for artificial intelligence for a while. I've been completely resistant to touching it or using it. But my mind is changing slowly, and I want to try and articulate a tiny bit about why. And mostly it's because I think artificial intelligence really needs actual intelligence behind it. That's the key. And there's a real risk that won't happen if the right people don't engage with it. What if we don't engage with it? Will it go away? Will people use it properly in the right way? And will the web be better or worse if we don't engage? And it's a really challenging thing that I've been struggling with for a while. And I mean, it's hard to argue with some of the sentiment and the very the eloquently kind of illustrated environmental impacts and all the rest of it. But one thing I would just say is that we're a really well-informed bunch. You know, we're an informed bunch in our domain of expertise, and we're an opinionated bunch as well. And being opinionated is going to matter more than ever, I think, because if the right opinions aren't expressed and kind of captured for the tools that are coming, then we're going to have the slot gun. What was it called? The pump action slot gun. Slop gun. Slop gun. Get it right. But I've been really worried about the pump action slop gun as well, and that's why I've been pushing back on it. But I don't know. There's a tiny part of my mind now that says, let's not waste all of the opinions and the wisdom that are in rooms like this by choosing to not engage. I think we need to figure out the right way to engage there. Now, for people who are building products and building documentation and trying to get their services and tools out into the world, as Leonie kind of mentioned earlier on, agents are going to be consuming that. So we should try and make sure that, you know, if someone's going to make something with automation and tools that we're not part of the loop for, let's inform them the best possible way so they can use the right things. I'm not going to labour the point too much. I will just say that I'm usually like the slowest person to adopt any kind of abstractions, and I see this as a bit of an abstraction. I think I've just got just about time to kind of to play this. This lives in my head rent-free. You know, in 2013, I was at this conference, and Chris Coyer was talking about SAS, and I had my arms folded like this because I was like, nope, I write CSS. Thank you very much.
So if we bust out the abstractometer, which everybody has one of these. There's the ones and zeros, there's no abstraction at all. That's the base layer of computing or whatever. Then there's an assembly language, which is a little abstracted away from that. There's language like C, which is a little bit more abstracted from that. Then there's like the evolution of C, C++, which abstracts some of that stuff away into libraries that's even more abstracted from that.
Etc. You get the point. But and I was like, okay, I get where you're going with this, Chris, but I don't know, the delivery of his next bit just got me.
It's a little weird of people that really like CSS and they like authoring in CSS. They're already this far up the abstraction layer and they're like, this far and no farther.
I felt like he was taking the piss specifically out of me at the point that he said that. And that's kind of lived on with me, and it's kind of influenced my thinking quite a lot. I'm still very slow and cautious about adopting abstractions, but in the end I started using SAS and loving it and finding that if I used it in an opinionated and thoughtful way, it didn't create some of the CSS slop that I'd seen being made with it before. So AI is not SAS. I'm not kind of trying to say this is the same thing, but it has had me thinking a little bit more, you know. And when I think about stuff that I love doing, I love drawing lines of boxes. I love doing architectures. I love planning how a thing is going to work, whether that's, you know, something complex for a client or something playful and whimsical for myself. I love doing this. I love planning it, and I then love implementing it. But I'm not too worried about spending the time writing some of the syntax sometimes. If I'm honest, you know, I've held on to that for the longest time, but I'm starting to loosen my grip a tiny bit because I'm also thinking that these other artifacts are really important. Good development projects should have those, and often they don't. I find that it's the communication is the real key here. And so anyway, my mind has been changing a little bit because I've been playing with some of the tools. And so I'm cautiously playing in those waters. I saw a talk a couple of weeks ago by someone called Matt Pocock, who you may or may not know. He does all kinds of teaching in the TypeScript space. He now does that in the AI space. And he gave a talk which was about why software fundamentals matter more than ever. And I came away from that optimistic in a way that I've never come away from an AI-based talk before, because it talked about how to get the right kind of thing out of it and avoid the slop. I won't try and reinvent that talk right now. And I know it's a bit of a hard sell, but it was interesting to me. You know, it feels like another layer of abstraction to me, and I've started enjoying it sometimes. God, this is tense in this room. But I've been doing so very cautiously. I've been doing so through like play and experimenting and building my own things and like learning how I could make use of it. I won't belabor that point anymore, but there it is. There's a tiny bit of my perspective on that from my experiences. Okay, one last example that I'll get to before I wrap up and hand back over. And that comes back again to kind of expanding your comfort zone. Now, for most of us, our comfort zone is down here when it comes to speaking in public, giving a conference talk, those kind of things, being on the stage. And I think what I'd say as we kind of come to the end of 10 years of All Day Hay on this stage is that if you're even close to thinking about giving a talk or speaking in public, it can feel like a bit of a leap of faith. But if you've been tempted at all, I'd really urge you to give it a try. If you're even a tiny bit tempted, giving a presentation at work or at a meetup or even a conference, I've found that I've learned a lot by doing that. I think probably a lot of speakers would say that they learn a lot about their subject matter by knowing they have to explain it to people and stand up and have some scrutiny. But it can feel like a real leap of faith, and I found it very rewarding, and I got encouraged to do it for the first time after doing talks, presentations within a company. And another leap of faith, really was, back in 2017 when Harry Roberts and Josh Nesbitt kind of got in touch and invited me to come and MC this for the first time, and it was a bit of a leap of faith for them because didn't know quite what it was going to be. I didn't really know what the event was going to shape out like, but the event happened and it evolved, and I think the atmosphere that has evolved over the last 10 years has started there on the first day when we were kind of feeling our way, and we're like, well, we don't know what the community is how they're going to respond to this, and who the speakers are going to be and how it's going to work. And each year the atmosphere kind of built, and the goodwill built, and that was a lovely thing to learn. And the team who organised this conference, learned things every year, and it became slicker and slicker. And Amanda, who's captioning right now, I think she's heard some of these phrases a few times, and she knows her way around technical content, and all of these things have improved. We've got stairs this year. I don't think you understand. If you weren't here, if you don't know, man, you weren't here, man. Yeah. People who've made that traverse across those other stairs and done the tiny kind of tightrope across here. We put stairs this year. Better late than never. We've enjoyed them this year, but always learning. We didn't know that 1 year the conference was going to be hosted from my spare room, and I'd get antsy between the talks and go off and make a cup of tea and then think, what biscuit shall I have, and then start talking about it, and people would care about that apparently. We didn't know that was going to happen. We didn't know that the year after that we were going to be in a studio in Leeds, just us at an awkward social distance, talking into kind of anonymous cameras, knowing that there was a lovely community other side of it. We didn't know that the AV team would pick up on the biscuit thing and provide biscuit cam. I can't tell you how proudly I put that on LinkedIn once I'd been involved in that. We didn't know what it was going to. Oh, excuse me. I knew it was coming. We didn't know what it was going to be like when we came back into this room. When we came back and could put our arms around you all. It was amazing. We didn't know the speakers that we were going to have. That this incredible range of speakers that would be on this stage and all apparently have strange hand gestures that they would do time after time after time. Some of the speakers getting so outrageous with their hand gestures that they would have to wear a wrist strap on their clicker. Who knew? So many things that we've learnt together, and we've kind of fumbled our way through some of the events, and they've got better and all throughout the time. And I think together we've made something that's just been lovely, and we've learnt so much along the way. The process that everyone's doing to build this conference and make it happen has just evolved over time, and we didn't know what the community was going to be like when we all came together. We didn't know we'd have roof parties, and we didn't know that I'd be accusing people of being stupid or of not understanding the biscuit etiquette. We didn't know about any of that stuff, but we've learned all of these things along the way, and getting out of our comfort zone a little bit and trying some of these things has been really rewarding. So if you're at all in doubt about whether or not you should give a talk somewhere or kind of put yourself out there, I'd encourage you to be brave and go for it. So I hope you play and experiment and explore, and I hope you find in whatever jobs you're doing or whatever you're doing outside of work, I hope you find it interesting in new ways to do impactful things. 10 years, it's a long time. I hope you find it, interesting ways to do impactful things or fun things, or both. I hope you explore the uncomfortable as well as the familiar. Because let's be honest, we need your insights, we need your expertise, and we need your talents. Thanks.
Wow.
So I'll give you back to Josh. Actually, no, I realised I was just going to, I think I've done it as well already. Sorry, Josh.
I'll take a seat.
I had intended to kind of say thank you after that, but I feel like I've kind of done it along the way. But, really, for everyone who's behind the scenes, because I'm about to hand back to Josh and kind of give and get off the stage. But, a heartfelt thank you. I've been so lucky to do this every year for 10 years, and I've really enjoyed it, and I'm sad to see it go, as you can probably tell. And just a big thank you for people also upstairs. Haven't forgotten you. Are they there? Who knows? Are you there? Yeah. You must use the view transition API. So a big thank you, and also a giant thank you to the person who makes this conference possible. And I'm going to let him have the final words. It's Josh Nesbitt.
Thanks, Phil.